Hello and welcome to Science. Today's target is all about identifying and naming parts of the scientific process. Now, this should be review for you. We've done this in class with our pendulum experiment, with the rat experiment, with the plant experiment, with your own your science fair experiment. So you've had lots of practice. So this should totally be review. We're going to do a couple practices this week. Together and on your own, and then on Friday you'll take a little quiz to show me what you know. So what I'd like to do is kind of get off the computer a little bit and get into the packets that I sent home when we did the Great Bag Pickup. So why don't you pause the video and go get your packet of information, and we'll kind of go through that. Okay, so if you open up your packet, one of the first things you'll see in your packet is this. It's just a review worksheet for you to play with, and we actually did this in class, but there was a lot of confusion, so I stuck an extra one in there and thought maybe you could play with that a little bit. Really think about where the sun is in the sky, and then how the shadow would be hitting the object. So like in this example, the light would be coming down, and so the shadow would be opposite the light source. It would actually be very short because the sun is high and the light is shooting straight down. Whereas in this example, the sun is off to the side. It's hitting this object at an angle. So the shadow is going to be opposite the light source and a little bit longer because there is more of an object blocking the light. So why don't you go ahead and kind of review that as practice. And then this is just matching the vocabulary up with energy action words, just reviewing energy. You can play with that. And this was all about energy transfer, just some questions. You can either fill it out or you can just discuss it with your family. But I just want to keep that energy and energy transfer fresh in your heads. And then this was an example of how energy transfers. Maybe you remember doing this in class. We talked about, for example, the banana is the source of energy. So we would label that as food energy, which we know is chemical energy. The energy transfers from the banana to his mouth. And in the mouth, it changes to chemical energy in his digestive system. And then that energy transfers down to motion energy when he walks, but also heat energy to keep his body warm. So you can play with that. There's another one on the back with the campfire. And here's what I want to do today. So this is a review of the scientific process looking at independent, dependent, and controlled variables. So let's just go through this one really quickly together and as an example, and then you've got one that I'm going to assign for you today. So here's the scenario. You've got Juanita and Sam, and they noticed that their homemade electromagnet was picking up fewer steel washers than their neighbor's electromagnet. So maybe they're doing an activity in class. They thought that this was happening because their neighbors had more wire wrapped around their steel rivet, and they decided to do the following investigation. So they were curious, how does the number of wraps of wire around a steel rivet, aka like a nail, affect the number of steel washers that can be picked up? So we know that electric current passes through the wire and creates a magnetic field. What you're doing is you're turning electromagnet. It makes it possible to turn a magnet, like a magnetic power, on and off by completing or interrupting the circuit. And if you remember, you did this in 4th grade with your electronics unit. So then there's a materials list here. And they came up with a prediction or a hypothesis. They're thinking that the more wraps of wire around the rivet, the greater number of steel washers can be picked up. So let's see if that is supported or not. There's a diagram here that's well labeled. So if I were to recreate this experiment, I would know exactly how to set this up. The next page has the procedure, And remember, in a procedure, all of the variables should be identified. So place the D-cell battery in the space provided on the circuit base and connect the wires to construct a circuit, including the switch. That is one of the controlled variables. So I'm going to put a C there for controlled. And then it says place the washers in a plastic cup. That would be a controlled variable. We're going to do the same thing for all our trials. Wrap the 150 centimeter wire tightly around the upper part of the rivet 20 times. Okay, so this 20 times, that is what's going to be our independent variable. That's the one thing we're going to change. Independent. It says open the circuit to deposit the washers on the desk. Close the circuit and pick up as many washers as possible from the plastic cup. And then open the circuit to deposit the washers on the desk. Those are all controlled variables. We're going to do that the same way every time. Count and record the number of washers that were picked up as trial 1 for 20 wraps of wire. So this part about counting and recording the number of washers, that is going to be our dependent variable. So how many washers it picks up depends on how many wraps. You're going to repeat the trials with 30 wraps and then again with 40 wraps. You're going to find the average of wraps for each trial. So here's our data table. Got 20 wraps, 30 wraps, 40 wraps, our 3 trials. You always want to do 3 or more trials, and the averages. And honestly, this is the only number that we're really concerned with at this point. Okay? Just focus on the averages. All right, then questions. So it's asking which variable was kept the same or controlled in this investigation, which was the independent or the controlled variable. We didn't change it at all. Was it the amount of washers held by the electromagnet, the time the circuit was closed, or the length of the wire? So you can go ahead and pause the video and think about that and pick which one you think was the controlled, which was kept the same each time. So you should have picked B. And let's go back and prove the others wrong. The amount of washers that it was picked up, that was the dependent variable. That's the data. The length of the wire, that would change based on the number of wraps. Number 2, which variable was changed or manipulated in this investigation? The weight of the washers, the number of wraps, or the size of the battery in the circuit? You can pause the video and think about it. And you should have picked B. We were testing if the number of wraps affected the power of the magnetic force. And number 3, which variable was the measured or responding variable? So which was the dependent variable? I'm going to put the word dependent here because that's actually the new verbiage that we're using. Was it the number of washers picked up, the strength of the battery, or the amount of wire used? You could pause the video and think about it. And you should have picked A, the number of washers picked up. Okay, so moving on. Based on the results of the investigation, why was Juanita and Sam's electromagnet picking up fewer washers than their neighbors? A, the neighbors had wrapped the wire more tightly. So this one's focusing on, is the wire wrapped tighter? Was that what we were looking at? The neighbors had wrapped the wire more times around. Were we trying to figure out if the number of wraps affected the power of the magnet? Or the neighbors had used a larger steel rivet? Okay, I don't remember anything being said about wire being tighter or looser or a larger steel rivet. I do remember talking about, let's see if the more times we wrap the wire around the rivet, the stronger the magnetic force is, and shown by how many washers it can pick up. So by process of elimination and proving the others wrong, B should be your correct answer. So this one says, in your conclusion, be sure to, you want to pay attention to these bullets. That's how you're going to be scored. So you're going to answer the investigative question, include supporting data from the table, and explain how this data supports your conclusion. This is super simple to do. Even if you're not a writer and don't like to write, it's super easy. So the first bullet says answer the investigative question. So I'm going to go back, and my question was, how does the number of wraps of wire around a steel rivet affect the number of steel washers that can be picked up? So with that in mind, I'm going to say the hypothesis was supported and then I can go back and look at my hypothesis, and it simply says the more wraps of wire around the rivet, the greater the number of steel washers will be picked up. And honestly, I can write those exact words. So I'm just going to say the more wraps you remember what it said? The more wraps of wire around the rivet, just go back and check if you're not sure, the greater number of steel washers will be picked up. Boom, done. First sentence done. So I can check this off. I just answered the question. The second one says include supporting data from the number of wraps wire versus number of washers picked up table. So I'm going to go back and refer to my table. And it shows me that when there were 20 wraps of wire, there was an average of 16 washers picked up. But when there were 40 wraps of wire, there was an average of 36. All I need to do is my high and low data. I don't need to do the middleman. So I'm going to say that. When there were, 20 wraps So what was it with 20 wraps? 16. Wraps, 36. I can't remember what I said. And when there were 40 wraps at 36. And sometimes before that sentence, I'll add the data shows. So sometimes I'll say that too. So the data shows. You can do that. Okay. Boom. Second sentence done. Last sentence says, explain how this data support your conclusion. So a good way to start that is with the therefore. So therefore, and there's no right or wrong. I'm kind of making this up as I go. The more wraps of wire provides a stronger magnetic field that can attract, should I use that word? Attract more washers. Boom, done. Okay, that's all you have to do. So it doesn't take long. All right, so what I'm going to have you guys do then is go back to your packet, and I'd like you to get one called Hold That Soil. Okay, so again, you're going to take a look at the investigation. I would suggest you take some time and read it carefully. Study the picture too. It's worth 1,000 words, right? And then take a look at the procedure. See if you can identify what is the independent, dependent, and controlled variables in the procedure. Study the table. Now this one doesn't have averages, so it's set up a little bit different, so study that. And then there's going to be some multiple choice questions for you. I'd like you to write a conclusion, just like we did. Looking at the bullets, it's not hard. Make it simple, 3 simple sentences. There's some more multiple choice questions. And then what you're going to do here is you're going to think about erosion. Remember, erosion is where earth material is actually carried. It's caused from weathering, but erosion is the actual carrying of the earth material, and it tells you right there. It tells you right up in the instructions. So I want you to describe a cause of erosion other than water flowing. So please don't talk about rain or a river or a stream. What else can cause erosion? And in your description, be sure to pay attention to the bullets, identify another cause of erosion, and describe how and where this other cause of erosion would happen. So you're going to fill that out there so you can picture with labels, and then you can use your words down here. And then I would like you, this is kind of an extra challenge, so this is optional. I want you to plan a new investigation. So Marco has done the first investigation and it still has some questions. So this time, curious about what is the effect of different types of earth material, like sand, clay, and black soil, on the amount of material washed away by water. Okay, so you could set up just like a pretend investigation based on the first one. Really, all you have to do is go back and look at the first investigation, and you can use the same verbiage, the same types of words, basically the same steps, but this time you're going to tweak it just enough where it's going to address the question of different types of earth material. Okay? All right, that was a lot of information. Great thing about the video is you can go back and pause it. You can rewatch it. So lots of opportunity for extra learning. All right. So what I'd like you to do is answer the questions about the scientific process in this hard copy. All right, let's get off the computer for a little bit and get into some paper pencil stuff. So do the work in here, and then I'd like you to go to the Google Forms, and then you'll just type in your correct answer. So that way you can see if they're correct or not. It will self-correct and give you some information if they're not to help you learn. And then it'll also let me see how you're doing. Okay? Have fun with that. Bye.